Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible perspective through the Rapture and studying Matthew 24 and the book of Revelations side by side. But before we continue, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. This is video 53 on our in-depth study of eschatology, the study of end times, with the focus on the rapture. That is right. We actually started this video. We actually started this series some, again, 52 videos ago, and we started it with it first started with me making my case. I think one of the first titles was biblical proofs of the pre-tribulation rapture, something like that. It's on the playlist. Then I said I wanted to go even deeper. I wanted to do a deeper dive into eschatology, actually looking at the verses, the prophecies on end times as it refers to Jesus and then the church, the second coming of Jesus and the rapture. So this is where we are. And then, so currently, so we've been studying, excuse me, I decided I wanted to study as kind of a guide for this section, a guide, Matthew 24 and the book of Revelations. So we started off by studying, here's Matthew 24, and then also Revelation, which, by the way, is both given by Jesus. Okay, start off, here's Jesus giving the revelation to John. And then in Matthew 24, Jesus is giving the sermon of the end times. And the layout is similar, where he starts with the present age of the disciples, the church, and then he shifts into the Great Tribulation period, also known as the 7-year tribulation period. And the same thing with the book of Revelations. You see the first 3 chapters, he's giving a message to the church. And then he shifts to the heavenly scene, and then shifts to God pouring out his wrath and judgment against the ungodly. Where we are is the actual second coming of Jesus. We've been talking about that, so that's where we are, the actual second coming. What does Jesus do when he comes? And we said that, well, every eye will see him when he comes. Now, also keep this in mind, because I'm going to, at the end of this part, I'm going to double back and then put all this together with the rapture. Because remember, really all of this is really kind of me making my case for a pre-tribulation rapture, where I believe that the church of Jesus Christ will not go through the tribulation period. Okay? Now, let me also say this. There are basically 3 commonly held views on the rapture position. There is what I hold to, the pre-tribulation position. I believe the church will be raptured before the tribulation begins. There are those that believe that the church will go 3.5 years through the tribulation period and then be raptured. And then there are those that believe that the church will go all the way through the tribulation period and then be raptured. This is not to be confused with another category, which I'm not dealing with in this series. I have dealt with it in other videos, and that is what is called post-millennialism, all-millennialism, and preterism. They're a different category, especially since how they interpret scriptures, allegorical, It's already happened, all that kind of stuff, which we won't get into. But the others, the rapture centers around really when it's going to happen in relationship with the tribulation period. The tribulation period or great tribulation period is that period of time, a 7-year period of time where God would be unleashing his wrath out on the world. Okay. I also say this, none of the positions, including mine own, has a clearly stated verse saying that the rapture will happen pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib. So these are all this what we believe, and we believe this based upon, of course, our study in Scripture. Okay, and so my exhortation is, at the very least, agree to disagree, stay in love. You'll be surprised how belligerent people get over these positions here, which is always kind of funny. But by making a godly argument, you become ungodly. But anyway, so as I said, where we are now is we have come to the place. We talked about the Great Tribulation, what happened during the tribulation period. So Revelation 6 through 19, the unleashing of the um, seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, the bowl judgments against the kingdom of the beast, the kingdom of the beast himself. So we studied that, and now we're talking about, okay, so at the end of the tribulation period, then Jesus returns. Then we talked about what that return looks like. So what that return looks like, excuse me, and that every eye will see him. In book of 19 says the armies that follow him out of heaven. So we have to question who is the armies, but the other thing is that throughout other prophecies we see that the evil armies of the world, led by the beast, or he's probably better known as the Antichrist. He's not, as far as biblically concerned, he's not as known. He's not referenced, I should say, as much as the Antichrist as he is the beast, the man of sin, the son of perdition. Okay, and we studied all of these prophecies about his kingdom, in which he will rule, he will deceive the world. And so in the final conflict, when Jesus is coming, he will lead his armies in a war against Jesus. Now, you need to understand something that I think that is kind of amazing. One of the threads that's throughout Scripture, there are several threads that holds the Bible together, the revelation. Obviously, God, Jesus, man's redemption, but also the sinfulness of man. That when you start with Adam's sin, what it sowed into people. Adam's sin sowed something, the destructive, the sinfulness. This sinfulness is unbelievable because when we talk about sin, and as the Bible deals with it, you have to go back to what the origins of sin. Now, actually, the origins of sin predate even Adam. So remember, the origins of sin go back as far as the rebellion of Lucifer. So where actually sin started in reference to God's kingdom, it's don't know. The origins of sin, however, that principle that causes someone to rebel against God. So we start with that. And sin is always on purpose. Now, as the law of Moses dealt with sin, it talked about unintentional sins, different degrees of sins. But when you go to its actual origin, any amount of sin, as far as God is concerned, is enough to flush the whole thing down, right? To flush it away. The presence of darkness, the presence of sin, is witnessed by the fact that there is darkness. Now, we'll get more to this in upcoming videos, but that is why it is referenced with in the eternal age, the continual presence of light. There will be no darkness, no nighttime. Okay? So if you are a lover of nighttime, and some people are, won't have it in the eternal age, okay? But what you see throughout the Bible is that sinfulness of man, that it gets worse, goes from bad to worse. If you want to look at it on an individual basis, sin can go from bad to worse. On a mankind basis, it goes from worse to worse to worse to worse to worse. God put his law into effect to sort of slow down that decaying process, right? You know, do you think about this? When you think about meat or vegetables, once you pluck them, they are on a decaying. They're on a decaying process anyway, right? Fruit by nature cannot stay on the tree. Eventually, it's going to ripen and fall off and then rot, right? Everything goes from good to bad and then worse. Meat, in this sense, is something that once you kill an animal, right, and you chop up the meat, it starts decaying. Your body, right? Your body, human body, when you die, you start decaying, right? You're going to eventually rot and go to dust. Well, the sin process. Now, the way you can slow that down, in other words, the process is going to happen, but you put it in a freezer, you can slow down the process of decay. You won't stop it, but you can slow it down. Man, when Adam sinned, and you can even say that Satan introduced sin into the world. Adam brought it into, and then from that point, man was on a trajectory of going from bad to worse. And this is what you see in the Bible throughout. So God gave us the law like you would put a meat in the refrigerator to slow down the process. But it is still going from bad to bad. And this is what we see towards the end. That at the very end of when Jesus comes, you see this sinfulness, this sinful nature. So rules man. This is why the world will be deceived by the Antichrist. We don't see it now because we're not in that time. We're not in that kind of presence of sin. But he will deceive the world to the point that even the world himself will even worship Satan, who gave power to the beast. That will culminate in them trying to fight Jesus at his coming. So when they see his coming, they're going to be like, oh, and they're going to amass to try to destroy him, and then he will destroy them with the brightness of his coming. Okay? Destroy them with the brightness of his coming. We saw that one of the things that God says is that he's going to gather the armies against Israel. He's going to gather all of the birds of the sky for this great feast of these millions upon millions who will try to fight against Jesus. And they will gorge themselves on their flesh. Very gruesome time. So I want to get to now, I want to do a couple of things with this session here. and that is I want to do this before I move on, because we're still talking about what is Jesus going to do when he comes. We saw in Zechariah chapter 14 where he will gather the nations, where he will set up his earthly kingdom. Here's what I want to do here. I want to read from the three Gospels. They are called the Synoptic Gospels because they are similar in style. I won't get into all of the theological debates over opinions of why they are that way. Some people say, well, one copied off the other, yada, yada, yada. But they are different in nature. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Mark, and then I'm going to read Luke, and I'm going to come back to Matthew, because we're going to move on into Matthew. Matthew is, of the gospel, the most Jewish of the gospels. And when you read through, this is why you will see more references to the Old Testament. You will see more Jewish perspective from Matthew. Mark is going to present more of a action kind of gospel. Jesus is the Son of Man in action. And then Luke is going to come from a Gentile perspective. He's a Gentile writing. So, and you're going to see that in his writing. But I want to read what we started off with, the 24th chapter of Matthew. But I want to read Luke's account, and I want to read Mark's account, and then I'm going to come back and read Matthew's account, and then follow through and go through, because I want to get into Matthew chapter 25, because it's really a part of Matthew 24. So this is Mark's account. And again, when you look at the different Gospels, look at it as a four-way stop sign. And if you was to have a car, 4 cars with dash cams, as they drive up to an intersection, and let's say they see a car accident. So what you would have is you would have 4 different views, right? So one view would capture maybe one side of the car, another view would capture the other side of the car, and that one may have people in it, the other one may have buildings in it, the other one may have traffic, whatever, right? 4 different views. So this is what we have with the different accounts. So Mark 13, he says, and as he was going out of the temple complex, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, look, what massive stones, what impressive buildings." Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone would be left here on another that would not be thrown down." While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives across from the temple complex, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to take place?" Then Jesus began by telling them, watch out that no one deceive you. Many will come in my name, saying, "I am he," and they will deceive many. Now remember, he's talking to his disciples. Now, ultimately, then, if he's addressing the disciples, the apostles, he's also addressing us. And the reason why is because in Matthew 28, one of the last words, according to Matthew 28, is that he commands them to teach everything that he taught them. Right? So in other words, there was no kind of secret teachings that the apostles got that ultimately was not meant for everyone. Okay. So this then is you can almost say church age. We don't have the details, for example, the revelation that the Apostle Paul received. But watch out, he says, then Jesus began by telling them, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, saying I am he, and they will deceive many. When you hear wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. And we always say this, that people always kind of are alarmed at some of the things going on in the world, but he said, but the end is not yet. So it's not a time of the end, even though people will oftentimes say, oh man, the Bible said in the end days we would have rumors of war. Verse 8, for nations will rise up against nations, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. These are the what? Beginning of birth pains. Be on your guard, but you be on your guard. They will hand you over to the Sanhedrins, and you will be flogged in synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a witness to them. And the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. So when they arrest you and hand you over, don't worry beforehand what you will say. On the contrary, what is given to you at that hour, say it. What is not you speaking with the Holy Spirit, then brother will betray brother, and the father his child. Children will rise up against the parents and put them to death, and you will be hated by everyone because of my name, but the one who endures to the end will be delivered. Now, in other translations, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard. This is the word save. He didn't do anything, would be saved, but other translations, what save means is delivered. Okay. Now, you notice he said that this good news will be proclaimed to all nations. Must be first proclaimed to all nations. Now, remember, if you look at, I'm going to give you a quick picture here, that Daniel's chapter 2, this image of the world from Nebuchadnezzar's time until the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is a full picture of the earth. So it's not talking about just geographically, which Paul believed, and said that the gospel had went through all the world during his day. However, from God's perspective, he's looking at it more from the beginning of time, or man's time, to the end of man's time. Okay. So then he says, verse 14, when you see the abomination that caused desolation standing where it should not, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Now, right here we see a shift in thought, in my opinion, right, from the church age, then back to the prophecies concerning God's dealings with Israel. So here we see the language of the gospel, verse 10, must be proclaimed at all the nations. And now he shifts back to the prophecies concerning Israel, as, for example, what he's quoting is in Daniel chapter 9. When you see the abomination that caused the desolation standing where it should not, let the reader understand. Now you understand that by Daniel's prophecy. Then those in Judea, so now he's talking about Israel. This prophecy, remember, was specifically for Israel. Daniel's prophecy, the 70-week prophecy, was about Israel, the people of Israel. I mean, the people, the Israelites, okay, and then the city, and then the temple, okay. He said, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. So he's not talking global. He's not talking about the global church. He's talking about the Israelites. Those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on the housetop must not come down, or to go in to get anything out of his house. A man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that it do not happen in the winter. Matthew throws in on the Sabbath. He said, for those days will those would be days of tribulation, the kind that hasn't been from the beginning of the world, which God created until now, never again will and never will be again, unless the Lord limit those days. No one will survive. But he limit those days because of the elect whom he chose. Now again, the elect here is talking about Israel, and that, remember, in the Old Testament scriptures, God's proclamation where he says, I will scatter you to the four winds of the earth. Then I will retrieve you from the four winds of the earth. So we saw prophecies after prophecies over there. In other words, he's not talking about the church, the Christian church here. It is the Jewish people. Verse 21, then if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, look, there, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. And you must watch, for I've told you everything in advance. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not shed its light, the stars will be falling from the sky, and the celestial powers will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. He will send out his angels to gather his elect from the four winds, from one end to the earth and to the other end of the sky. And so again, you see this the prophecy here about him sending out his elect. Now, how do we know that this is not talking about the church? The major difference is that Jesus personally comes for the church. Okay? He personally comes for the church. He doesn't send his angels for the church. And notice he's saying here, he's going to just send his angels to gather for the church. Okay? I'm going to read this too. Let me just read you this. Verse 6. This is Zechariah chapter 2, verse 6. And this is actually from the New King James Version. It says, up, up, flee from the land of the north, says the Lord. For I have spread you abroad like the four winds of heaven. Up, okay? So again, I just want to see the language here. Let's go back now. Let's see here. Well, let me go back, but anyway. Okay, so look at verse 28. Learn this parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprouts, it leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the door. I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now, I'm trying to think when I'm going to really want to kind of unpack this. We have this phrase. Well, there's two things. The fig tree and then the generation of the fig tree has been something that has been so badly misinterpreted. And that is let's see here. Okay. The fig tree, I'll deal with it more when I get to Matthew's accounting. And the same thing with this generation. But notice what he said about the generation. I say that because a lot of people thought that generation, one, again, a gross misinterpretation that a generation was 40 years. That's the first thing. And then people said, because they said the fig tree represented Israel. That's not what was going on here. But that the idea that the fig tree was simply an indicator. In other words, here's the fig tree. How do you know the seasons? Like, for example, if the leaves start to fall off, you know fall is coming. But in the same way, it says when the leaves appear, you know that summer is coming. That's all what the fig tree was pictured here. Now, some people then made the erroneous interpretation that the fig tree represents Israel. So when Israel became a nation and the generation was 40 years, the nation that saw the generation that saw Israel become a nation, Jesus would come. Well, that was 1947. I'm not even convinced that 1947 was a fulfillment of prophecy. And it certainly was not what God said would happen about Israel going back into the land. All right. Verse 32 says, now concerning the day or the hour, no one knows, neither the angel in heaven or the Son, except the Father. Watch, be alert. Now, this idea here, when he says that no one knows the day, the hour of what? Jesus coming. That's the first thing. Now, some people say, well, the Son, no one knows, the angel is the Son. So even the Son of God is it. No, I'll just leave it at that because he doesn't explain that. Okay? Watch, be alert, for you don't know what the time is coming. It's like a man on a journey who left his house, gave authority to his slaves, understand that, and gave each one his work and command the doorkeeper to be alert. Therefore be alert, since you don't know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or at the crowning of the rooster or early morning. Otherwise he might come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to all, I say be alert. All right, so let's go to Luke. I want to read Luke's accounting. Luke's accounting. So that would be Luke 21. All right, now Luke's accounting is going to be from a Gentile perspective. Luke was a Gentile, okay? So he's writing, and his writings are right, of course, after he traveled with the Apostle Paul. So Luke wrote from an eyewitness to the apostles, okay? So verse 5, he says, as some were talking about the temple complex, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left on another that will not be thrown down. Teacher, they asked him, so when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he. And the time is near, don't follow them. When you hear wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, these things must take place first, but the end won't come right away. So again, let me just say this. Global warming is not a sign that Jesus is coming, okay? Verse 10, then he told them, nation will rise against nations, kingdom against kingdoms. There will be violent earthquakes, famine, plagues in various places. So they geographical and the shifting, that all that kind of stuff is taking place is not in and of itself the sign of the end. He says, and famine in various places, and there will be terrifying sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you, persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. It will lead to an opportunity for you to witness. Therefore, make up in your minds not to prepare your defense ahead of time. For I will give you such words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will even be betrayed by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will kill some of you, and you will be hated by everyone because of my name. But not a hair of your head will be lost, but in your endurance gain your life. Now, what is interesting here is, again, how Luke tells the same story, right? And then he says, but in your endurance gain your lives, okay? But he said, but not a hair of your head will be lost. Now, again, some of these languages are kind of interesting because many Christians did die. Okay, they did die. So the question would be, what did Luke mean as far as the language. Now, when I say that, for example, if I say, or like when my mother would say, "Boy, if you don't stop, I'm going to knock you into tomorrow." Well, we know she wasn't talking about time travel. She knows she wasn't talking about bending the space-time continuum. Okay, but anyway, verse 20: when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. Now, what is the desolation? Remember, he said this at the beginning. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. Now, here's the thing here. Remember when we talk in terms of prophecy, that we always think, you have to always think in terms, some prophecies have a near fulfillment, and then others have a far fulfillment or ultimate fulfillment. So I believe the near fulfillment is, well, what happened in AD 70. The army surrounded and then they were destroyed. I do not believe that that's the ultimate here. I'm not so much convinced that it's really even referring to AD 70 here. But I'm going to say that if it is, then it's a near fulfillment. So when we go back, remember he says, verse 6, excuse me, then these things that you see, the day will come when not one stone would be left on another that would not be thrown down. And then they ask, when would these things be? So now he's kind of given a sign of when these things would happen, right? But now pay attention to the details. Remember, I always say pay attention to the details. Then those in Judea, no, go back. Verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and recognize that its desolation has come near, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those inside the city must not leave it, and those who are in the country must not enter it, because these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all things that are written. So right here we know that he's not talking about AD 70. I can say at best, it is a near fulfillment of AD 70 when Titus, the Roman general, leveled the city. But it is certainly not the ultimate fulfillment here. Because notice he says, because these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all things that are written. AD 70 did not fulfill all things. Verse 23, woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath against its people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now you might say, certainly this could apply to AD 70. Well, again, keep this in mind, that at the time of the destruction led by the Roman general Titus, that Jerusalem was already scattered. They were already scattered. Okay. Now, as I said, this could be a near fulfillment. All right, verse 25 says, then there would be signs in the sun, moon, stars, and there would be anguish on the earth among nations, bewilderment by warring seas and waves. People will faint for fear and expectation of the things that are coming on the world, and because of the celestial powers will be shaken. Now, stop. If you go back and read our studies, when we went through Revelation chapters 6 through 17, you do see all of these things here, this distress. At the end of the seal judgments, the kings of the earth says, fall on us, for the time of his wrath has come. hide us from the face of the one, for the. They were talking about God, and he said, because the day of his wrath has come. Okay. Then verse 27 says, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, stand up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is near. So the question becomes, who is he referring to here when he says, because your redemption is near? Now again, with this, you kind of have to understand all the prophecy. Now, if you remember Zechariah chapter 14, which says, a day of the Lord is coming. And then what? He kind of prophesies this, what Jesus is talking about. That Luke is recording Jesus is talking about, right? That he says that a day of God, the day of the Lord is coming. He says that your houses will be looted, the city will be taken, women raped and ravaged, right? And then you see he comes, and the Bible says the Lord will fight. Okay, the Lord will fight. So this, when he says here, if you understand the Old Testament scriptures, you understand that he is talking about he's talking to Israel, right? So these signs here refers to Israel. All of the Old Testament prophecy that talks about these things refer to Israel. Now, some would make the case that this is talking about the church and maybe the rapture of the church, which I totally disagree with. Again, the setting, you have to keep this in mind, that at the time, Zechariah also says he will gather all nations against Jerusalem, right? And we go over and over again, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all of the prophets, they speak of the same thing about the judging of Israel, judging of the nations that are attacking Israel. All right, so then he said, verse 29, then he told them this parable. Look, the look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put out leaves, you can see for yourself. You can see for yourself and recognize that summer is already near. So again, remember, the fig tree wasn't Israel itself, but it was just an illustration of the signs of the times. He said, in the same way, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Then he says, be on your guard, excuse me, so that your minds are not dull from carousing, drunkenness, and the worries of life. Or that day will come on you unexpectedly like a trap, for it will come upon all who live on the face of the earth. So anyway, who is the warning to? The Israelites, okay? So what day is he talking about? Jesus' return. We'll get to that when we get to Matthew in a moment. Be on the alert at all times, praying that you would have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. Now let's go to let's go to Matthew 24. We've read it many times. Let's read it again in context with these three here, these other two chapters. As Jesus left and was going out of the temple complex, his disciples came up and called his attention to the temple buildings. Then he replied to them, don't you see all these things? I assure you not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Then Jesus replied to them, watch out that no one deceive you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah. Notice Matthew uses the phrase again, Messiah. Like I say, his gospel is of the most Jewish, right? And they will deceive many. You are going to hear war, then rumors of war. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nations, kingdom against kingdoms. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Then they will hand you over for persecution. They will kill you. And you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will take offense, betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, because lawlessness will multiply. The love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be delivered. Now, again, remember we said this word delivered here, save, but save means delivered. Then he says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So now he can ready to make a shift. Remember here, he's talking to the apostles. He's talking about to the disciples. So the testimony is going to be what? The kingdom, the good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed to all the world. So now he switches to prophecies that address specifically Israel. So when you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So we read this many, many times. Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8. Okay, Daniel chapter 9, but talks about these 70-week prophecies. It says 70 weeks are decreed of your people, your city, and the temple. It says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The man on the housetop must not come down to get things out of his house. And the man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that doesn't take place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days will be limited because of the elect. If anyone tells you, then look, here is the Messiah, or there, over here, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Now again, it's not talking about Christians, it's talking about Israel. Take note, I have told you in advance, so if they tell you, look, he is in the wilderness, don't go out. Look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe him, for the lightning shines from the east and flashes far as the west. So will the coming of the Son of Man. So will the coming of the Son of Man. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be gathered. Now, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, remember, we studied the tribulation, and in terms of the horrific events that God will afflict on the evil world, the kingdom of the beast. This will be followed by his return immediately after the tribulation of those days. So we read about those events in Revelation chapter 6 through 17. Actually, 18, and then 19 brings about the second coming of Jesus. The sun would be dark and the moon would not shed its light. The stars would fall from the sky, and then celestial powers would be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather the elect from the four winds and from one end of the sky to the other. Now he says, the Son of Man will come on the clouds with clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now we saw this, remember, in Revelation chapter 19. Okay. Now this moment says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprout its leaves, you know that summer is near. That is what the issue of the fig tree is here. An indicator that summer is near. And the illustration is, as he's going to say, in the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. Then he says, I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now, you kind of have to remember that the generation that will not pass away will be those all the way into the tribulation period, when all of these horrible, horrific things is happening on earth. Okay, so that's the generation, right? You go back here, for example, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, then flee the horrific events that will happen around this here. We haven't seen that yet. Okay. Verse 36. Now concerning the day of the hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven or the Son, except the Father only. Now I said as far as the Son, don't know, right, what Jesus means by that. Okay, since he is God, we're not going to get into that discussion. He doesn't clarify either. Now, what he is going to tell us too, concerning that day and that hour, no one knows, neither the angel in heaven or the Son, except the Father only. But then in verse 37, as the days of Noah were. Now, remember, he just told us about the parables of the fig tree. So now he's going to give us another example. How do we know when the time has come, when the second coming is upon us? As in the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. So this is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. The two men will be in the field, one will be taken, one left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taking, another left. Therefore, be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Now, we kind of have to stop now. Let's go back up for a moment, because we have to answer a couple of things. Who is he talking to right here? Be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Who is he talking to? Now, obviously, if you believe in the mid-trib or post-trib tribulation, you'll say he's talking to the church, he's talking to Christians. I don't believe, I think he's talking to Israel. Right? He's talking to Israel. Let me go back for a moment and let's go. There's something I want to address in verse 37 when he says, as the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. Now, the reason why I want to bring this out here is that a lot of people, I kind of grew up in Christianity, and because I did not read the scriptures, and so you got people's views, and you would hear people say things. So I would hear people say that we know that, well, here's a good example. There were people that taught that God was going to judge America. And a lot of, and by the way, some of these people were saying this like in the 40s and in the 50s, right? And I say that because these were the times when you go back and think about the what's called the golden age. Now, they weren't as golden, but so when you think about the golden age of America, and what you would see is this Leave It to Beaver kind of image of America, right? Father knows best. You have to kind of go back and look at a lot of the way white America was pictured. I say white America because black people were in these shows. Leave It to Beaver. for the most part, the Brady Bunch, but that was more the 70s. But you go back into the 50s and the 60s, Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Ozzie and Harriet. They pictured an America that was pure as the white driven snow. And yes, I'm being funny. Everybody was nice. Everybody, and so that the image was that America was pure then. And then all of a sudden, here comes rock and roll, and then it was corrupted. Okay. Now, so when you get into the 50s, it began to give birth to even words what they would call debauchery. The 60s, and certainly in the 60s, you had the hippie movement, free love, and then evangelicals lost their minds. The 70s, 80s, right? And then, of course, as you look at it, things got worse and worse and worse. I would more say things just came out of the closet. Not got worse, but things that came out of the closet. But my point is that there were a lot of people that were saying that America had, even now, if you tell people that we want to return America to back to its Christian roots, they're talking about that fantasy time that never existed in America. Now I'm confining it to America, but that's what they're talking about. It never existed, by the way. Americans were evil, especially when you're talking about the racial. You might have had Ozzie and Harriet because remember in those shows there were no black people, but when you think about the horrific treatment of black people through Jim Crow, through slavery, that's why I said it never existed. So there were a lot of things that would go on behind the closet. I'm not just talking about homosexuality, yes, that too, but just whatever lifestyle, sinful lifestyle. Incest was still going on back then, horrific, alcoholic abuse, all that kind of stuff. Those things were going on. It wasn't until they just started coming out and people started expressing themselves that people go, now, oh my God, they lost their minds, right? Okay. And so because of that, then people were saying that God was going to judge America because, well, it's just like the days of Noah. And the reality, they weren't like the days of Noah. Even today, it's not like the days of Noah. And I'm going to explain that in part 54 because I'm out of time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you in part 54.